The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that almost hums in your ears. All eyes were locked on one man, her husband, sitting tall, shoulders back, with a smug grin spread across his face. He believed this was his moment of triumph. The final scene where he would walk away with everything. In his mind, the house was already his. But then, the judge leaned forward. Her voice sliced through the tension like a blade. One sentence, just a handful of words, was enough to wipe the smirk clean off his face. In that instant, the entire courtroom shifted. Imagine building a home with someone you love, brick by brick, memory by memory, only to discover that the very person you trusted most was plotting to rip it all away. A husband, not satisfied with walking out of the marriage, wanted to steal the very foundation of their life together. But what he did not know was that his scheme was about to unravel in front of everyone. Stay with me, because the twists in this case will leave you questioning just how far someone will go when greed takes control. On the surface, they looked like the couple everyone wanted to be. Neighbors admired them. Friends envied them. A handsome husband with an ambitious career, a devoted wife who poured herself into family and home, and a picture-perfect suburban house with a neat lawn and a white picket fence. They were living what many called the American dream. Their story began years earlier, when they met in college. She was drawn to his confidence, the kind of man who could walk into any room and command attention. He was captivated by her warmth, her loyalty, and her unshakable belief in building a life together. They married young, and like most couples, they struggled in the beginning. Tight finances, small apartments, second-hand furniture. But with time, things improved. Careers grew, opportunities came, and eventually they purchased the house. It was not just any house. It was the symbol of every sacrifice they had made. Late nights, missed vacations, years of scrimping and saving. To her it was home. To him it was victory. They had children, bright, lively, full of promise. Family photos lined the walls of the house, evidence of birthdays, holidays, and milestones. To the outside world, this family had it all. But behind the closed doors of that seemingly happy home, cracks were already spreading across the foundation. At first, it was subtle. A sharp tone when she asked about the bank account. Long hours away from home, explained with vague excuses. A credit card bill that seemed unusually high. She wanted to believe him. She told herself it was stress, or work, or maybe even her imagination. But those little moments planted seeds of doubt that only grew with time. He was controlling with money, insisting she leave the finances to him, brushing off her questions with charm that now felt more like dismissal. He started making decisions alone, shifting investments, moving funds, always claiming it was for their future. But the future he envisioned was not the one she thought they were building together. Their arguments grew sharper. Love turned to resentment, and when the word divorce finally surfaced, it seemed almost inevitable. To outsiders, it looked like another marriage simply coming to an end. Papers would be signed, assets divided, and both would move on. Or so everyone thought. But this was no ordinary divorce. Because when it came time to discuss the house, the heart of their shared life, he unveiled a plan so cold, so calculated, it left her stunned. The man she had trusted, the man she had built a life with, was preparing to strip her of the very ground beneath her feet. At first glance, it seemed like a typical marital split. But buried beneath the legal documents and polite courtroom exchanges was a betrayal that cut deeper than any affair. He was not just asking for a share. He was trying to take it all. And the question that loomed over the courtroom was chilling. How far would he go to get his hands on the house? Their love story began the way many fairy tales do. Unexpectedly, almost casually, yet with a spark that neither could deny. She was a sophomore in college, focused on her studies, driven by the dream of building a stable, honest life. He was a senior, charismatic and bold, the kind of man who knew how to draw a crowd and leave them laughing. They met at a campus gathering. He walked straight up to her, confident and assured, and within minutes had her smiling. That was his gift. He made people feel seen, even special. For her, it felt like destiny. For him, it felt like conquest. They dated through the ups and downs of student life, part-time jobs, late-night ramen dinners, and long hours in the library. When he proposed after graduation, her heart said yes before her mind could even question what lay ahead. Their wedding was simple but heartfelt, surrounded by family and friends who believed this young couple had everything they needed to succeed. In the beginning, marriage was not easy. They lived in a cramped apartment, counting every dollar, rationing groceries, and taking turns working double shifts. She sacrificed her weekends to help him climb the corporate ladder. He promised her it would all be worth it one day. And she believed him, because back then, she believed in him. Years passed, and his career began to rise. Promotions came, along with pay raises and social recognition. She took pride in his success, even when it meant she had to bear the weight of the household and children alone. She kept telling herself, this is temporary. This is for us. This is for the future. And then, the house. It was not just 4 walls and a roof. To her, it was proof that their struggles meant something. Every inch of that house represented sacrifice. She had gone without vacations, skipped buying new clothes, even put her own career aspirations on hold so they could save enough for the down payment. The day they signed the papers, she stood in the empty living room, her voice echoing as she whispered, "This is home." But for him, the house meant something else entirely. It was not about stability or family. To him, it was a trophy, a visible marker of success, proof to his colleagues and friends that he had made it. He would show it off, brag about it, throw parties where he strutted around like a king. While she saw a place of warmth and safety, he saw a monument to his ego, and with that ego came ambition. At first, it looked like drive, the kind of determination any partner would admire. But over time, it began to morph into something darker. He grew reckless. He took business risks that made her uneasy. He brushed off her concerns with a laugh, telling her she did not understand how the game worked. She noticed money moving in and out of accounts, sometimes with no explanation. When she asked, he would turn cold, insisting she leave the finances to him. Whispers of doubt began to creep in. Once she overheard a late-night phone call, his voice low, urgent, discussing papers and moving things quickly. Another time, she found an envelope tucked away in his desk, filled with documents she did not recognize. When she confronted him, he snapped, his charm evaporating in an instant. "You do not need to worry about that," he barked. "Focus on the kids. I will handle the rest." But her instincts told her something was wrong. Then came the rumors. A co-worker of his mentioned seeing him out with another woman. A friend hinted at questionable deals he might be involved in. She wanted to dismiss it all, to cling to the image of the man she once believed in. But the man she was living with no longer felt like the same person she married. The tension grew unbearable. He was irritable at home, demanding, dismissive. He spent more time away, less time with the family. The warmth that once defined their marriage had been replaced with suspicion and fear. And then, divorce entered the conversation. He presented it almost casually, like it was the logical next step. But what unsettled her most was not the fact that he wanted out. It was the way he carried himself. Almost smug. Almost as if he had already planned everything down to the last detail. She thought the house, at least, would remain hers. After all, she had poured her soul into it, raised their children there, and sacrificed so much to make it a reality. But behind closed doors, he was weaving a plan. He was maneuvering assets, shifting paperwork, creating a path to claim the house as his own. She never imagined that the man she built her life with was quietly plotting to strip her of everything. And then, one evening, as she sat at the kitchen table, sifting through a stack of neglected mail, she opened an envelope. Inside was paperwork that made her blood run cold. A document that revealed the truth about what he had been planning. The house was never safe. The life she thought they built together was about to be ripped apart. The moment she saw the documents, her hands began to tremble. It was not just the legal jargon that startled her. It was the unmistakable realization of what they meant. Her husband had not only been planning the divorce, he had been preparing to transfer ownership of the house into his name alone. Hidden accounts, forged signatures, and a trail of paperwork designed to cut her out completely. At first, she thought there had to be some mistake. Maybe she was reading it wrong. Maybe it was just another business deal she did not understand. But the more she studied the documents, the clearer it became. This was intentional. This was betrayal. She felt the air leave her lungs. Tears welled in her eyes as she clutched the papers to her chest, shaking her head in disbelief. The walls of the home she had fought to build suddenly felt like a prison, every photograph on the wall mocking her loyalty. That night, she confronted him. He came home late, his tie loosened, his expression smug as if he had just closed another deal. She was waiting for him at the kitchen table, the stack of papers spread out like evidence in a trial. "What is this?" Her voice cracked, equal parts fury and heartbreak. He glanced at the documents, barely flinching. Then, with an icy calmness that cut deeper than any scream, he said, "It is just business. Just business." 2 words that turned her world upside down. She exploded. Years of sacrifices, of faith, of loyalty, reduced to a transaction. She reminded him of the nights she stayed up with sick children so he could sleep before work. The weekends she spent alone while he chased his career. the dream she set aside so he could chase his own, and now he wanted to erase her from the very foundation she had built. But instead of remorse, he smirked. He told her she was overreacting. He said she would thank him one day when things were simpler. Then his words turned darker. He warned her not to fight him. He had the money, the lawyers, the influence. If she resisted, he promised to bury her in court. Her tears turned to resolve. He expected her to crumble, to walk away quietly while he walked away with everything. But she refused. She would not let him take the house, not after everything she had endured. The tension in the house grew unbearable. Arguments erupted over the smallest things. He slammed doors, raised his voice, made veiled threats about what would happen if she made this harder than it had to be. She began to fear him, not just his temper, but the cold calculation behind his eyes. One evening, after another explosive confrontation, she locked herself in the bedroom, clutching the documents. For hours, she cried. But when the tears dried, something changed. She was no longer the woman who sacrificed in silence. She was no longer the wife who allowed him to control the narrative. She made a decision. She would fight. The next morning, she contacted a lawyer. She explained everything. The hidden documents, the financial manipulation, the betrayal. The lawyer listened carefully, then looked her in the eyes and said, "You have a case, and if these papers are real, you have more power than he thinks." For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of hope. When he found out she had hired representation, he was livid. He stormed into the kitchen, his face red with rage. "You really think you can beat me?" he spat. "You have no idea who you are up against." But she did not flinch. She looked him dead in the eye and replied, "Neither do you." The stage was set. What began as a marriage was now a war. The house had become the battlefield, and the courtroom would decide who truly owned it. She braced herself for the fight of her life. What she did not know was that this battle would reveal far more than property disputes. Buried secrets were about to surface, and the truth would leave everyone, including the husband, staggered. The courtroom was packed. The air was heavy, electric, as if everyone could sense this was not going to be an ordinary divorce hearing. On one side sat the wife, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her face pale, but her eyes burning with determination. On the other sat the husband, leaning back in his chair with that same smug grin he had worn at home, as if this entire proceeding were a mere formality before he claimed his victory. The judge, a stern woman with years of no-nonsense rulings under her belt, surveyed the room. She was not here for theatrics. She was here for the truth, and today, the truth was about to come out. The wife's attorney rose first. Calm, measured, but with steel in his voice. He painted the picture clearly. A hard-working woman who had sacrificed her own ambitions to build a home and family. Blindsided by a husband who attempted to steal the very house she had given everything for. He laid the documents on the table, the hidden transfer papers, the signatures that raised suspicion, the financial trail that smelled of fraud. The judge's eyes narrowed as she scanned the evidence. Then it was the husband's turn. His lawyer strutted confidently, spinning a narrative that the wife was exaggerating, that she had no head for finances, that the husband had always been the one to manage the money. He framed the attempted transfer as a simple restructuring, a strategy meant to protect the family assets. He painted her as emotional, irrational, incapable of understanding the complexities of financial planning. The husband sat there smirking, nodding along, as though victory was already written. But the real battle began with cross-examination. The wife's attorney went in hard. "Sir, can you explain why your signature appears on this document, dated 3 weeks before you even filed for divorce, attempting to transfer the deed solely into your name?" The husband shifted in his chair, his grin faltering ever so slightly. "That was a precaution. I was advised it was the right move for tax purposes." "Advised by whom?" the lawyer pressed. Silence. The courtroom stirred. The judge leaned forward. "Answer the question," he stammered, offering vague references to a financial consultant. But when pressed for a name, a document, any proof at all, he had nothing. His arrogance was beginning to crack. Then came the witnesses. First, a close family friend testified. She recalled a conversation with the husband at a barbecue months earlier. He had boasted, half drunk, about setting things up so she gets nothing. The husband's lawyer objected, but the judge allowed it. The words hung in the air like smoke, choking his credibility. Next came a financial expert, brought in by the wife's team. He had combed through the accounts, traced the transfers, and laid out a damning pattern of manipulation. These were not protective measures, the expert declared firmly. They were deliberate moves to remove her from ownership. In my professional opinion, this was an attempt to commit financial fraud. The husband's face turned red. He whispered furiously to his lawyer. But there was nothing to counter the cold, hard analysis of the numbers. The wife herself then took the stand. Her voice trembled at first, but soon steadied. She told her story. The sacrifices, the loyalty, the betrayal. She spoke of the nights she sat up waiting for him, the bills she paid while he chased ambition, the documents she discovered that shattered her trust. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she never broke. The courtroom was silent, hanging on her every word. Even the judge's expression softened, though her tone remained firm when she said, "Thank you. You may step down." When the husband took the stand, his arrogance returned. He dismissed his wife's testimony as emotional exaggeration. He insisted she never understood business. He painted himself as the victim, a man unfairly demonized for trying to manage finances responsibly. But the cracks kept widening. Under questioning, his timeline fell apart. He contradicted himself, first saying he filed the transfer under professional advice, then admitting he had signed it alone. He claimed he told his wife about it, then minutes later said it was not her concern. The contradictions piled up, and every one of them eroded his credibility. The judge's patience wore thin. "Sir," she said sharply, "this is a court of law. I suggest you remember that." Still, he could not help himself. His arrogance was his undoing. Then came the dramatic reveal. The wife's attorney pulled out a final piece of evidence, a notarized statement from a former employee of the husband's financial firm. The statement claimed the husband had boasted in the office about moving the house into his name before the divorce, laughing that "she will be out on the street while I live like a king." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The husband's face was drained of color. He stuttered, called it a lie, and accused the employee of fabricating the story. But the damage was done. His carefully constructed facade of control and confidence had collapsed. The judge leaned back, eyes fixed on him, her expression unreadable. But just when the husband thought he could still twist the narrative, just when he clung to the hope that his lawyers might spin one last defense, a single piece of evidence surfaced that flipped the case upside down. The courtroom was already tense, but what came next shifted the entire case into uncharted territory. The wife's attorney stood, his hand resting on a thin folder that had not been opened until this very moment. He paused deliberately, letting the silence stretch, before sliding the folder onto the evidence table. "Your Honor," he began, his voice steady, "new documentation has surfaced, and it is directly relevant to this case." The judge gestured for him to continue. He pulled out a series of bank statements. The courtroom leaned forward as copies were distributed. What they revealed was devastating. A hidden bank account, opened in another state, under the husband's name. It was not just an account, it was an escape fund. Thousands upon thousands of dollars had been siphoned from joint accounts, moved secretly, without his wife's knowledge. The timeline matched perfectly with the period leading up to the divorce filing. Gasps rippled across the room. The wife's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. She had suspected financial manipulation, but not this. Not an entire account dedicated to erasing her from their life. The husband's lawyer scrambled to object, but the judge silenced him with a sharp wave of her hand. "Overruled. Proceed," the attorney pressed on. Not only did he attempt to seize the house, but he also drained their finances in preparation for the divorce. He wanted her with nothing, no home, no savings, nothing. The husband's face was flushed, his composure slipping with every second. He muttered, shook his head, and tried to dismiss it as prudent planning. But then the attorney delivered the blow that shattered whatever credibility he had left. Among the documents was a hotel invoice, paid directly from that secret account. The dates matched weekends when he had told his wife he was away on business trips. But the invoice did not list just one occupant. It listed two. The courtroom erupted. Whispers turned into audible outrage. The betrayal was no longer just financial. It was personal, intimate, devastating. He had not only plotted to steal her home and security, he had funded an affair with the very money he had stolen from their accounts. The wife sat frozen, her hands trembling. The man she once trusted had betrayed her on every possible level. Love, loyalty, and livelihood. But as the shock rippled through her, something else took hold. Strength. She was no longer the victim in this room. She was the woman standing in truth, while he drowned in lies. The judge's eyes narrowed, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Order in the court." The room fell silent. The husband tried to defend himself, sputtering excuses, claiming it was a misunderstanding, a business meeting, anything but what it truly was. But nobody believed him. His arrogance was gone, replaced with desperation. The wife's attorney spoke with finality. "Your Honor, this is not only betrayal. It is calculated fraud, manipulation, and moral bankruptcy." The judge leaned forward, hands folded, her gaze fixed on the husband. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. And that is when she prepared to deliver a verdict no one saw coming. The courtroom sat in suffocating silence as the judge leaned forward, her voice slicing through the air like a blade. "Mr. Thompson," she began, her tone sharp, deliberate, and unyielding. "What I have witnessed in this courtroom is not the behavior of a husband, nor of an honest man. It is the calculated deceit of someone who believed he could manipulate the law, his spouse, and this very court for his own selfish gain." The husband stared down at the table, his once smug expression now hollow, his confidence stripped away piece by piece. The judge continued, her words gaining force. "You attempted to strip your wife of her home, the very foundation of her stability. You siphoned funds into hidden accounts. You financed an affair while pretending to be a devoted husband. And then you had the audacity to sit in this courtroom, smirking, as though you had already won." Her gavel hovered, but she was not finished. "This court does not reward liars. It does not tolerate fraud, and it certainly does not protect arrogance." The husband's lawyer shifted uncomfortably, as if trying to shrink into the wooden bench. The wife sat frozen, tears welling in her eyes, clutching a tissue tightly between her hands. "My ruling is final," the judge declared. "The marital home shall remain in Mrs. Thompson's name. All hidden assets discovered in these proceedings will be returned in full. Furthermore, Mr. Thompson, your actions have consequences beyond property. Your credibility is shattered, your reputation tarnished, and your financial schemes exposed for all to see." The husband's head sank lower, his mouth opening as if to protest, but no words came out. For the first time in the entire trial, he was silent, defeated, stripped of the arrogance that once defined him. Then came the final strike. The judge's gavel came down with a thunderous crack. "Judgment is entered in favor of Mrs. Thompson." The room erupted, not in noise, but in an almost cinematic silence. Everyone seemed to exhale at once, as though the air itself had been held hostage until that gavel fell. The wife wept quietly, her shoulders shaking with the release of months, perhaps years, of fear, betrayal, and uncertainty. She had walked into this courtroom terrified of losing everything. She walked out with her dignity, her home, and the truth on her side. The husband remained seated, stunned, his face pale. The man who had orchestrated lies, who had believed he could bend everyone to his will, was now nothing more than a broken figure hunched at the defense table. As the judge rose and left the bench, the sound of her footsteps echoed with finality. Justice had been served. But as the wife wiped her tears and gathered her things, one thought lingered. The verdict had given her victory, but the scars of betrayal, those would remain. Trust once shattered does not mend easily, and though she had won, she knew the story of her marriage would forever carry the stain of deceit. Because even when the gavel falls, the echo of betrayal never truly fades. This case was not just about property. It was about betrayal, greed, and the devastating cost of broken trust. A husband who once stood as a partner in love turned into an adversary in court, willing to gamble away everything for the sake of control. But justice, sharp and uncompromising, stood firm. The verdict proved a simple truth. Lies may last for a moment, but when exposed under the light of the courtroom, they collapse faster than anyone expects. Yet the question remains, what would you do if the person you trusted most tried to strip you of everything you built together? Would you find it in your heart to forgive? Or would you, like Mrs. Thompson, choose to fight back? I want to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you agree with the judge's decision? If you found yourself hooked by this story, make sure to like this video, share it with someone who loves real-life courtroom drama, and subscribe so you never miss the next shocking case where truth battles lies in the most dramatic way possible.